all of those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. The next item on our agenda is public comment, and I'll turn to Mr. Whiting.
None received.
None received, no one in the room. Okay, thank you. The next item on our agenda is the consent agenda, and you see those items before you, and a motion would be in order.
So moved.
Second. I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. The next item on our agenda is a public hearing to consider a conditional use permit, and I will turn this over to Mr. Whiting and to Mr. Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Give me 1 moment. Can you all hear me? Can I be heard on the broadcast? Can I go to is there a microphone at the podium?
Yeah, but it would project better.
If I go to the podium? In fact, the note says, please speak loudly. At this time, we will begin the public hearing to consider a conditional use permit and major site plan review that's been submitted by RBD Holdings LLC for construction of a dock. On this matter, the board sits as a quasi-judicial body, and that means that certain special rules apply. First, the board's decision must be based on competent material and substantial evidence in view of the record as a whole. Those who are presenting evidence must be sworn or affirmed by the clerk. The board's decision must be based only on evidence that is presented during the hearing. In addition, there are special conflict rules which apply as well. When a public body sits as a quasi-judicial panel to decide a conditional use permit or a site plan application, it is imperative that no member participate in or vote on the matter in a manner that would violate the affected person's constitutional rights to an impartial decision making. Impermissible violations of due process include, but are not limited to, having a fixed opinion prior to hearing the matter that is not susceptible to change, having had undisclosed ex parte communications, and having a close familial, business, or other associational relationship with an affected person or a financial interest in the outcome of the matter. Now, previously undisclosed ex parte communications which have not caused you to develop a fixed opinion may be cured through disclosure of the facts or information obtained on the record. A party or member of the board, including the board member at issue, may object to any member's participation for lack of impartiality. If an objection is raised to a member's participation and that member does not choose to recuse themselves, the remaining members shall by majority vote rule on the objection. So at this time, I ask whether any of you have any conflicts which would keep you from being an impartial decision maker, or have you had any undisclosed communications or received information which you would like to disclose at this time? Commissioner Fuller.
I've had direct discussion with the applicant and direct discussion with the applicant's agent. Most of that discussion centered around process, not an opinion about the particular application, but just about the process of the application, and I have no fixed opinion.
Very good. So you believe you can be fair and impartial as you hear the evidence and decide this matter based only on the evidence that is presented in the hearing today?
I do.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fuller. Does anybody else have anything that they need to disclose? All right. As we begin, there are certain procedures which will apply here. First, the applicant has the right to question any witnesses and to offer rebuttal evidence. Board members may question any witness at any time. If the board has a question for any witness, it needs to be asked during the public hearing, that is, during the evidentiary presentation. Just let me know if you have any such questions, and I'll make sure that you get a chance to ask them. As we begin, all witnesses must receive and take the oath from the clerk of town clerk. So at this time, I will ask that all those who are present or who will be presenting evidence on this application, please approach the clerk or receive from her the oath so that we may begin. Madam Clerk.
Please raise your right hand. Put your left hand on the Bible. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you.
Madam Clerk. So at this time, we'll begin the public hearing by receiving the presentation of the staff's analysis of the application, which I believe will be presented by the Deputy Planning Director, Kelly Wyatt.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. As noted, this is a conditional use permit, major site plan review, that's being requested by RDB Holdings. The request is for consideration of the construction of a 196-foot long pier, which would better facilitate the operation of the existing water-dependent commercial outdoor recreational uses. The property is located at 6920 South Coast Highway. Both the previous, existing, and current use would remain water-dependent commercial outdoor recreational activities. The property is located in the C2 district, as well as the commercial outdoor recreation overlay. So the existing use and the proposed use remain consistent. We did include the 2017 comprehensive land use plan and the policies that pertain are included in the package. We do find that those policies are consistent, and we support the request for the water dependent uses being requested. There's no change to lot coverage for this request, so that remains compliant. Height, architectural design, there's no structure that would apply to. There's no change or alteration in the operation of the water-dependent uses or the types of uses there, so the parking would remain compliant. Buffering and landscaping, staff will ensure that the landscaping and buffering is compliant before we issue final zoning. Oh, they're pointing out, I need to speak louder, I apologize. We will make sure that landscaping and buffering is compliant before we issue the final zoning, but last summer, when our code compliance officer, Ed Snyder, did the run through of the town, it was compliant at that time. Lighting will be unchanged, but we will ensure that it's compliant as well, and there's no change to signage at this time. Stormwater and traffic circulation are unchanged. The project satisfies to comply with the North Carolina Fire Prevention Code requirements. Also, there's no need to receive health department approval for this with regards to septic capacity. The Public Works Director has reviewed and approved the proposal. A CANA major permit is required, and that is in process. So obviously, before any building or zoning permits are issued, we'll make sure that CANA permit is in hand. So with regards to this being a conditional use permit, we did find in researching the application that in 1994, the outdoor recreational uses, the water-dependent uses, those were approved in 1994, but at that time, that was permitted by right. It wasn't considered a conditional use. The bumper boats that are out front, those were considered a conditional use that did receive conditional use approval. So as part of this application, we suggested that this be considered a conditional use for the purpose of making it compliant with the standards that are in place for commercial outdoor recreational activities today. So again, 1994 was not a conditional use. Today, it is. So now that we're proposing a major amendment, such as the 196-foot long pier, we felt like that did elevate requiring it to comply with the current standards of a conditional use permit. As noted previously, we do find that the request is consistent with the, applicable use and development standards and the land use policy. We've provided, the 5 findings that the board, must go through in considering the quasi-judicial application. With that, staff does recommend, approval of the application as presented, and on January 19th, the planning board also reviewed and recommended approval of the application as it's been presented today. So, to answer any questions that you have, and as noted, the applicant Ralph Buxton and his agent, John DeLucia, are both here today.
Now, do members of the board have any questions for Ms. Wyatt? None? Does the applicant have any questions for Ms. Wyatt? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
At this time, if the applicant would like to present evidence on the application, this would be your opportunity. For the record, if you're pleased, Mr. Blue, to start off by telling us your name and your capacity here.
Good morning, I'm John DeLucia from Albemarle Associates. I'm representing Mr. Buxton in this matter. As Kelly stated, there's no changes in uses, we're just trying to bring the stocking facility and the water facility up to the standards that we expect today. Since 1994, the pier has taken a lot of abuse, flooding, and it's just kind of cleaned it up, it's safer for everybody, more environmentally friendly for the watercraft users and for the watercraft employees. It'll give them the ability to get the watercraft up out of the water for maintenance and fueling and things like that. So overall, it will provide a much better environment for the users of the day. Safety. Oh, and safety. It will promote better safety of the users and the operators there because of the safety.
All right, does the board have any questions for Mr. DeLucia?
Commissioner Castillo.
Just one, good morning, John. Good morning. Just one question. Am I right in what I read on the site plan that all the decking and all slats will be a minimum of 2 feet above mean high water?
I think with this, a minimum, the only thing that's 2 feet above mean high water is that 4 foot wide lower platform around the first platform off the land. Everything else is going to be 3 feet off the water.
Thank you.
Just one thing, I want to make sure the applicant is aware that the town is in a process of trying to put a Sunnyside boardwalk along that area, and albeit we're moving very slowly, but before any money's expended, I just want to make sure the applicant knows that it is a town plan to put a boardwalk there at some time in the future.
Thanks.
Are there any other questions from the board for Mr. DeLucia? There are none. Mr. DeLucia, is there any other evidence that you wish to present on behalf of the applicant at this time?
No, sir.
All right, any questions from staff for Mr. DeLucia? All right, any further evidence from staff? And Mr. Buxton and Mr. Zanger have both been sworn. Do you all have anything you wish to present?
No.
Does the board wish to receive any other evidence before you begin deliberations on this application? All right, if not, we will conclude the public hearing at this time, and you may begin your deliberations.
Thank you. If I could, perhaps for the purpose of discussion, go ahead and get a motion on the table. Commissioner Castillo.
I make a motion that we approve the conditional use permit for this property, subject to the 5 conditions as stated in the memo.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Would that be also with the approval of the Camel Major?
Yes, subject to the approval. I think that would be,
Nothing else can happen without that.
hearing no further discussion, had Having a motion and a second on the floor, I would ask all those in favor signify by saying aye.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor,
If you would do a roll call vote, please, from the clerk.
Okay, you will. All right, Madam Clerk, will you please poll the board then?
Sure, Commissioner Brinkley, your vote,
Aye.
Commissioner Fuller, Commissioner, Mayor Pro Tem Sarah,
Aye.
Commissioner Napier,
Aye.
Mayor Cahoon,
Aye.
thank you.
thank you all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ralph, John.
Thank you, everybody. Hope we all get our jobs soon.
Yes, soon, please. Right. The next item on our agenda
Okay.
is old business table from previous meetings, and this would be a, sand fence discussion in response to the letter from John Cece. And Kate, that's going to address this. Is that correct?
She's muted.
Yeah, we can't hear her.
Muted.
She'll have to log out and come back in. Now, Kate, it's been suggested in the room that you should log out and log back in, please.
Okay.
Oh, there you are, never mind. There you are.
All right. Thanks for your patience. Can you hear me okay now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. New laptop, so I think that was my fault. Anyway, good morning. I hope you're all doing well. Good to see you. I wanted to go over the discussion item today. You guys have a summary sheet in your packet. I'll just run through that quickly. Again, this is a table discussion based on John Cece's email that I believe you've all read and have a copy of. To sum it up, I think that while input is always appreciated on, modifications and ideas for moving forward with dune management, at this time, staff agrees that, especially since we have a project in the works now, and I'm writing a contract now for the installation of sand fencing, as well as the items that I pointed out in the summary sheet, that we'd like to stick with the 10-foot spacing based on some feedback we received. But not only the feedback from Mr. Rogers, but based on, past experience and observation in using the 10-foot spacing to move forward as planned with the 10-foot spacing. But of course, as I mentioned in the memo or the summary sheet, making decisions on the ground as needed, of course, is important and is usually, how some of the sand fence installation goes to begin with. So we would be I would be working with the contractor to make good decisions if there are locations that really don't have room or, aren't appropriate for sand fence. So I just wanted to kind of see if anyone has any questions or discussion on anything listed in the summary. John's feedback, or Mr. Rogers from Sea Grant was kind enough to provide some information as well. And then there's moving forward, after we get through this project, perhaps we'd like to have another discussion about expanding the cost share program. We can do that. It's going pretty well. We have probably about 6 or 7 people that are participating right now. We can do that. Do you all have?
Thank you. Commissioner Fuller?
As I read your memo, it seemed to suggest that Spencer Rogers' comments were an opinion, not based in any science. Is that correct?
Well, I think that he has a very deep understanding of dune management. And he's spent his career working on that, and he's participated in a lot of efforts throughout our entire state. So I would say, while it is his opinion, I think that his opinion can be based on his own experience and facts and science related to dune management that he has developed over the years. And he's written the dune management book as well. He's a co-author. So, while these are, I guess it depends on your definition of how you draw an opinion in some ways, but I think he has a breadth of experience on the matter. And I think that's an important part of his opinion.
And I would argue that John C.C. has an extensive background in sand fencing as well. And so it's basically opinion-driven, not science-driven. And even the CRC is making their standards based on turtles, not based on science.
Well, I think that the clarification would be that the actual spacing rules are developed mainly for sea turtles, and just separating that from the dune science, I think, is a key point. I mean, it's that spacing is what was developed to make sure sea turtles can, get up into the dune, turn around if they're nesting, and come back down, and that was the kind of ideal spacing for that. So, I think maybe the key here is that we've used the 10-foot spacing in the town. We can go out and walk our beaches and see for ourselves that it does work, that we're comfortable with it. And to me, I think that's really what's driving this forward, is that we have that to go look at. If we want to look into, adjusting that spacing, we could try a pilot project somewhere. But I think just jumping to that 20-foot, without having a place to go out and look at it, maybe isn't the most prudent decision at this point.
Commissioner Cahoon.
Morning, Kate. I noticed that Spencer's memo back to y'all that he suggested the sand fencing be as far westward as possible. In our case, not considering southern beaches, but the further away you are from the beach, is better. And what I've seen in the past, in some cases, our sand fencing is so far eastward that it washes away with first northeaster.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a consideration. And, I think it all depends on where, the room that's available for sand fencing. And you're right, we don't want to put it too far east and have it be washed away. So, there may be situations where we don't have room, and, we don't place it if it's too far eastward. But does it make sense to start helping homeowners out, maybe installing fencing further westward in the future? It may, something we could think about, similar to a cost share, helping them, develop that dune further west if they want to.
Thank you.
I don't know why we don't at least try, just check it out. I mean, it's not one of, like Webb said, John's got a great deal of experience. Spencer's got his opinion, John's got his, let's at least try it. I don't think it's gone.
We cover a lot more beach.
A couple other points. One is, if it's at 20 feet and it doesn't work, we can always go back and put it in because we haven't restricted ourselves. And the second point is, in my discussions with a lot of oceanfront property owners that we've asked to have easement signs, one of the biggest sticking points with them is not having the sand fencing and making sure that they're asked before we put a sand fence out there, that they're asked, do I want a sand fence or don't I want a sand fence? So there's opportunity there where sand fencing would not be appropriate, but I don't see a downside to trying it.
Commissioner Stevens.
Isn't the sand fence purpose to help build or reestablish a dune? And what we have currently is a lot of drifting sand getting through a 10-foot and creeping over into the yards and the pools currently. So I think a 20-foot span in the right area might be okay, but in some of these areas where we have so much drifting sand, the 10-foot span might be the best use if we're trying to build a dune. If we're just trying to hold some sand, I mean, I catch more in a smaller gap than I can catch in a larger gap. And I can take you to houses that the sand is up on the house, 50 feet away. So I think it comes back to what are we trying to do? We're just trying not to impede upon the homeowner and not build a dune in front of his house in some of the historic sections? Or is it a matter of, are we trying to build a dune and a width of a dune that our beach nourishment engineers have tried to put together? Or are we trying to move west on top of the existing dune and build a higher dune, which the homeowner is going to push forward just as soon as they have an opportunity? I mean, it's not an easy balance, and I don't disagree we shouldn't try, but I think in the right area would make, sand fencing in the north side where we don't have as much drifting sand, and sand fencing in the south side where we have a ton more drifting sand, might not be the best place to try that.
Well, I mean, what I took from John's letter and the memo is that there's no arbitrary spacing that is going to work in every condition, and an arbitrarily narrow spacing in all occasions is wasting money that we could save by expanding the spacing to up to 20 feet. So, I sort of like, I think where Mike is that, yes, there are places where it can and should be 20 feet. And there are clearly cases of where it probably should not be 20 feet. And I'm not inclined to assign an arbitrary number either. And so I'm wondering, are we directing staff to go to 20 feet uniformly and then come back and infill later when we identify conditions, or are we giving staff the direction that we'd like to see 20 feet wherever they think it's appropriate, and that we understand that they, with their feet on the ground, need to put it closer, sort of thing.
Can I say one thing, if I may? Just based on experience, in some locations, it could be difficult to come back in between the 20-foot spacing. And it may not be, we could see what happens, but if you get a significant amount of sand trap there, it could make it difficult to come back in between. Maybe not, we could see how it goes, but just throwing that out there as a possibility.
But if it's trapping at 20 feet, then it's doing what it's supposed to do.
Right.
If it's not trapping at 20, we can easily come back and put a section in. But there are sections that drift heavier than other sections on the beach.
I
think we're getting there. I think we're all basically agreeing that flexibility is the key, and even from 10 feet all the way to 0 in certain areas, based on, if you will, the values of certain property owners not wanting sand fence at all.
Yeah, that's a good point, Webb. I've had a few calls of people not wanting it at all, so I have a list going of people that just don't want it at all.
So, Kate, I think what I'm hearing is that we do want to see, to the extent possible, understand we're trying to maximize their money on sand fencing. And if there are areas where we can go to 20 feet, we'd like staff to do that.
Okay.
And it's all about maximizing, and getting as much dune built. I mean, the idea is to get as much dune built per dollar as possible. And so if we can build dune effectively at 20 feet, let's build it at 20 feet. If we need, for any number of reasons, spacing, as I think Webb said, if 10 feet to 0, then, and take into account those owners who don't want it at all.
Okay.
Commissioner King?
I'm good.
Okay, so I articulated that adequately.
Absolutely.
Okay. Board, any other comments? Thank you, Kate. Appreciate it.
Welcome.
Commissioner King, I'm sorry.
We're gonna have the town manager respond back to Mr. CC
Yes, thank you.
with that, with what we have decided.
Okay. Greg, I don't know if you were able to hear that, but we would ask you to respond to Mr. Cece with a report of this discussion and how we're going to proceed.
Yes, I will do that.
Thank you. All right. And thank you, Kate, for your report.
Thank you, guys.
The next item on our agenda is new business, and this is recommendations for the recycling plan from the Waste Reduction Task Force. This is going to be Andy.
Right. Good morning, Mayor and Commissioners. We're happy to bring this forward to you this morning. The Waste Reduction Task Force has been working hard on looking at various methods to improve our programs for sanitation and recycling and other waste reduction efforts. They've met 4 times since you appointed the committee. As you recall, the committee members are Ann Daisy, Carrie Bacchus, David Bragg, Robert Netsch, and I said Ann Daisy. Oh, Meredith Fish, I'm sorry. Excuse me. So we have 5 committee members, and then we have several staff on the committee. Mike Norris with sanitation. We have Roberta Thuman, Carolyn Morris, interim town manager Greg Sparks, and myself. And it's been a great group of people. I think the board selected a very engaged committee task force to look at the issue. And we've had some really good discussions around a lot of different topics. Obviously, we have another report, a more formal report to present back to the board. We need to have one more meeting to finalize that. But in light of the planning we need to do for the summer season, we've brought forward this for discussion for the board today. So as outlined in your memo, 2 primary alternatives have been looked at by the committee. One of the alternatives includes basically reinstating a townwide program, which we had up until last summer. And really that's very similar to what we were doing previously. We would be using bay disposal. We would have a combination of town forces and bay disposal, collecting recycling in the summertime. And the material would now be sent to a new facility in Portsmouth. A company, RDS, would be processing that material. In the 7 months in the off season, the town forces would be picking up the material and taking it to the transfer station in Currituck at Bay Disposal, and then they would be transferring the material. This alternative includes some cost increases for material processing. On the second page of your memo, you had a breakdown of those costs. And essentially, the previous full year cost for the services, not including town forces collection, was $231, and the new cost would be $244. So just shy of $13,000 increase with this alternative. The services would be provided on the same days, unless the board wanted to entertain a change, but the contractor would be collecting the recycling in the summertime on Mondays and Fridays. So the second alternative that the task force looked at is a subscription program. And we did an RFP. We issued that prior to Christmas. We got bids back in late January. Committee met after the bids came back, and we evaluated this alternative relative to the one I just spoke of previously. And TFC submitted the bid. We had one bid. Tidewater Fiber is based out of Virginia. Their presence down here currently is primarily with the town of Duck. They do a town-wide recycling service for the town of Duck, but obviously they handle large customers in Hampton Roads with some of the major cities up there. The subsidized, or not subsidized, the monthly fee that their bid included was $14 per month per subscriber, and that would include a 1-day-a-week service on Mondays. And one of the things we noted in the memo was that if we went to that would essentially change our schedule. And so we would have some recommendations for the board on schedule changes to go along with that. So the task force looked at these alternatives. As you see in the memo, they deliberated and expressed several values regarding the discussions on recycling and waste reduction. Obviously, the committee members are very passionate about recycling. They believe that the town shares their passion for waste reduction and recycling, and that we should lead by example and offer programs to our residents and visitors that demonstrate our values. They also believe, though, that we should do this strategically, that recycling is one of many things that we can do to further waste reduction goals, but it's not the only thing, and that by doing recycling strategically and cost effectively, we can expand our reach and capture more programs that we might not otherwise have been able to if we're spending our money wisely. So cost effectiveness was important to the committee. Recycling and waste reduction was very important to the committee. And I think what you'll see is that their recommendation reflects a balance between those two values. Another important point is that we've had a lot of instability in our program. We've seen several cost increases that were presented to us each year. And then we've also had sort of global changes that have affected the ability for us to recycle. These are the main reasons why we didn't recycle last summer, was because of these changes in instability in the markets. The subscription provider, TFC, has been in the recycling business for a long period of time. That is their primary goal. They're not a hauler, they're a recycling company, and they have the facilities to process and market the material. They're the primary MRF in Hampton Roads. And so, when we speak of stability, I think looking at that really enhances our capacity to be able to continue to recycle and not have other things happen. Finally, education is a strong point that the committee wanted to make. If we go forward with any program, we really need to educate. And so that was an important point they wanted to make. So with that said, acknowledging the balance between being able to provide a quality, stable service and a cost-effective solution, the committee is recommending a variation of alternative 2. And so that would be an opt-in subscription program. However, the committee would really like the town to consider encouraging as much participation as possible. And so what they would like the board to consider is a subsidy for the monthly rate. And we looked at this subsidy, and there's a discussion in the memo, and obviously even providing a subsidy would be substantially less than the town was paying before, but it would still show that the town cares about recycling and has skin in the game. So the task force talked about a subsidy. In the analysis we provided to the task force, we looked at the tipping fees that our average household pays or monthly. And obviously if a subscriber is recycling material, they're now paying that tipping fee. Recognizing that not all the material would go to recycling, we sort of split that difference at between $3 to $5 per month as what staff recommended to the task force. And so as an example in the memo, a $4 monthly subsidy would create a subsidized rate of $10 a month per household. And then this would be less than the other subscription services on the Outer Banks. Kill Hills is at $12.45 per month, and Mania is at $11.35 per month. And so if you looked at 500 subscribers at a $4 a month subsidy, that's $2,000 per month or $24,000 per year cost to the town. The committee deliberated on the subsidy. They really wanted to come out strong with the subsidy. They actually suggested to the board that we look at splitting the cost with the subscriber at $7, so the subscriber would pay $7 and the town would pay $7. And so we did a brief analysis of that in the memo, what we thought that would cost per year. I think it's important to note that when we last did subscription recycling in 2015, we had about 450 true subscribers. I think the goal of the task force is to get well beyond that number. So even if you're at 1,000 subscribers with a $5 a month subsidy, that's an annual cost of $60,000 to pay the subsidy, but then realizing that some of that would come off because that's savings in tipping fees the town would realize. So our analysis, sort of cursory analysis, said that the cost would actually probably be between $30,000 and $40,000 a year after you consider the tipping fee savings. So the committee's recommendation, to summarize, is alternative to an opt-in subscription service provided by TFC on Mondays, once a week, year-round, at $14 a month, and with a town subsidy of up to $7 a month per subscriber. So that's a summary of the alternatives. There's some other considerations that we noted at the end of the report. The biggest thing that we're considering is the changes to the schedule and how we're going to deal with recycling carts. We've been developing plans for those items, and we're also looking at how we can improve our recycling drop-off sites, recognizing that we probably need to enhance those services, and we've got some ideas for that too. Mike Norris is on the call or the meeting with myself, and so we can both answer questions for the board. And so for now, I'll leave that to the board and entertain any questions or discussion.
Board members, Mr. Brinkley, questions?
Andy, how many people currently have signed up for subscription-based service?
So that's a point I wanted to try and clarify. When we looked at this last summer, the board asked us to determine how many people would like to sign up for a subscription service, recognizing at that time we did not have a subscription service. And so we put a call out for people to sign up, and we got about a little over 200 people signed up. That effort started to wane later in the year. But keep in mind, when we put that call out, we did not know how much the monthly rate would be. So it was advertised that, $15 to $20 per month was the assumption, because we didn't know what it would be. And so it was really somewhat speculative. I think if we establish this as a formal program, we would get many more subscribers than that. And so I hope that answers your question.
Okay. One other question there. When you talked about some of the carts, most carts were provided for free initially, however, some were paid for, and staff has determined an approach that would account for this. The previous manager told me that we had some taxpayers that paid for their carts that were never used for recycling. We never picked up recycling in the blue carts. If that is the case, I want to make sure that, depending on whether they sign up for the subscription-based service, that we address matters like that, because that's not fair to those taxpayers that paid money for a cart that they have never used for recycling.
Right. And if they paid money for a cart, we see that as obviously different than if we provided a cart for free. Our goal would be to collect the blue carts and store them and possibly sell some of them, because we think that's the cleanest way to do this. And then we would reissue the carts to those that subscribe. We really don't want a bunch of blue carts out there that are being used for trash or that are creating confusion amongst the people that are visiting here. And we would note that the state does not want us to be using the recycling carts for trash collection, even though we did that temporarily last summer. We'd like to get away from that practice. So our goal is to collect the carts if we can. So recognizing that most everybody got one free cart initially, we think we could collect those carts, and then we would have to work out what we would do with the people that paid. Obviously, one option would be to reimburse them for the cost of the cart, either at full cost or at some sort of reduced rate. And so we're trying to determine that now. It'll be a work in progress, but recognizing that a lot of these folks purchased a cart a little over a year and a half ago, they haven't really had the use of the cart very long. So we feel like we would need to do something with that.
I certainly appreciate that, and also I'd like to thank you and the other task force members for the time and dedication to this and coming up with your recommendations.
Oh, thank you.
Commissioner Fuller.
Well, I mean, we were faced with a hard decision when we got rid of the program. I think it was the right thing to do, as witnessed by Corolla just recently doing away with theirs. I think we did the right thing appointing the task force. I read all this. I think the task force and staff did a remarkable job, particularly recommending the incentive program. I think that shows that we are still committed to trying to do something. I'm very much in support of what's being presented. As most of y'all know, I tend to try to find something wrong with what's being presented, and about the worst I can find, Andy, is the heading for the recycling data memo is identified as the pink pattern preschool reward chart. And I'm not sure that the pink pattern preschooler reward chart is the best heading for that.
Well, if that's the worst we did, then I feel good. So.
I agree. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Sears.
I'd just like to thank the committee and staff for their time. They put together a good presentation. I, like Webb, agree with what they presented, and the town having a little skin in the game. So that's
Commissioner.
Andy, thank you, and the committee. I think everybody did a really good job. I thought there was a lot of thoughtfulness given to providing a subsidy, which I agree with, by the way. Which one we end up with, I'm not sure where, but I do like that idea. Question about the trailers that are at Town Hall and Public Works. What happens to those?
Mike and I have been discussing that situation, and maybe I can let him chime in and go over what we discussed yesterday. We can't hear you, Mike. Okay, well, I think Mike, I'll go ahead and chime in then. We would like to come back to the board and request to purchase some equipment. Right now, we have one commingled container at Town Hall that Bay Disposal collects. And then we have a cardboard dumpster, which is an 8 cubic yard dumpster. What we'd like to have are two 30-yard containers here at Town Hall and at Public Works. And so we'd like to get new containers. We'd like to be able to service those containers ourselves rather than relying on a contractor to service the containers. That would substantially increase the volume of material that can be put in there and really clean those sites up. So I think we recognize that going to a program like this, we need to enhance these collection sites. And so that's sort of our short-term plan. That we are talking about a more long-term plan for sort of a drop-off site as part of the Public Works master plan. But for now, we'd like to increase the capacity of both the sites to collect not only cardboard, but commingled recycling.
Andy, also, this is not with the cart thing, but our commercial recycling for cardboard, would that continue on, and where does it go?
So we, Mike and Karen and others at Public Works have been working to call businesses and set up additional cardboard collection stops. And, you know, we can provide dumpsters, or we can do hand pulls, which we've been doing for years. And that material would go to Dare County. It would not be assessed a tipping fee because that Dare County sells that material. And we like to set up a 1 day a week a collection for cardboard. I think Mike said Tuesday. And then we'd also like to collect glass on Thursdays and set up businesses for this. That was actually a recommendation of the committee that we're going to talk about when we come back later to the board. But really looking at increasing our commercial collections like that. You know, we can get rid of glass for free. We can get rid of cardboard for free. Those items tend to be very heavy. And so we think we can get tipping fee reductions by doing those types of things and then offering additional services to businesses. Our commercial tipping fees are slightly greater than our residential. And so that tends to be low-hanging fruit for us because we obviously only have a small percentage of commercial stops to residential stops. And so it's much more efficient to do that.
Okay, thank you. I think that's a really interesting program that you can probably save a lot of money on by encouraging those businesses via either a rollout or a smaller type dumpster than the big green dumpsters, smaller blue dumpsters, like for cardboard only, you know, have it delineated. That's a possibility to help the recycling program as well. Thank you.
Sure.
Andy, I'll thanks to the work of the committee and staff on this. I like the recommendation very much for a couple of reasons. I don't like getting single bids for things, but I do like the culture of the company that came forward, and not just that they are a company of long standing, but they're a company that's really about recycling. And that's has been one of my concerns, is that when we say we're recycling and we tell our citizens we're recycling and we ask them to recycle, that the material is really getting recycled, and this vendor provides that for us, and I think that's really important. The other thing I would add in terms of the discussions about the subsidy is I do like the idea of landing at some point that's a little below the neighboring towns. But what I would suggest is that when we're considering that some money be used for an educational campaign to really drive this process. So we can't take all the savings, I don't think, and put it into a subsidy. We can take some savings and put it into a subsidy, but I'd like to see us really aggressively, and whether that means enough money for a professional campaign that really pushes recycling, or for hiring an intern for the summer, or, I'm spitballing, but I really think that the educational campaign has to be part of this, and it's about waste reduction. Something we've done at home is we're trying a new product that's they're washer sheets that come in a little envelope. So you throw a sheet in your washer instead of pouring a liquid. And then it's in a plastic bottle, you get 16 washes. You get this little envelope in the mail or from Amazon, and you get like 40 washes in this little cardboard envelope. And so you don't have plastic to deal with. And so I'd like to see us really identify those opportunities, promote those to our citizens at the same time to kind of reduce the whole stream. So again, thank you. I think you hear that the board is, I think we're all on the same page with the committee's recommendation.
Do they need a recommendation of which subsidy to apply, the staff recommendation or the committee recommendation?
And the question is, do we need to, does the board need to weigh in now with a vote on the subsidy, or is that going to be part of the budgeting process and sort of can wait?
Well, I think there's a number of things that need to happen, and I guess we want some guidance or some direction from the board on how this might move forward. You know, the board can obviously make decisions today. The board can make decisions at another time. And so, you know, we wanted to see what the board's comfort level was with making decisions now. Obviously, we think we need direction on the subsidy now because this program would begin before the budget's adopted. if we can get the number of subscribers that we need, we want to start this by May. And so we would have to enter into a contract with the vendor for the service. We would likely have to adopt an ordinance establishing a franchise agreement. We would probably want to make changes to our Chapter 30 sanitation ordinance regarding carts required, maybe some other changes to that ordinance. And we're going to need to make schedule changes to the sanitation service. And finally, we're going to need to figure out what to do with the recycling carts, as Commissioner Brinkley was asking about. So, I guess the first two decisions the board will need to make is, okay, which alternative, what's the subsidy, and then we would need to authorize the town manager to negotiate a contract with TFC. And I think we would need to authorize the town manager to take an action to terminate the contract with Bay Disposal.
All right, thank you, Andy. The board, I would suggest that we debate a motion that would choose one of the alternatives and possibly within the same motion make a recommendation to staff for the subsidy. Renee?
I make a motion that we adopt option 2 as presented with the acceptance of the bid proposal presented by Tidewater Fiber Company, and that we include a subsidy of staff suggests $3 to $5 per month subsidy.
Okay. All right, thank you. Is there a second for that?
Second.
All right, I have a motion and a second. Discussion. So $5 would make the residents charge $9.
Whatever the
Yeah, however that works out, but that's based on what we know now.
Do we know how that's gonna be paid?
And Andy, the question is, how is the homeowner's charge to be paid? Will they pay directly to this contractor, or how does that work?
I think what we would suggest is that when we advertise the service, once the subsidy and the recommendations are adopted, we will advertise the service to the residents at $9. And so when they see the number, they'll see $9. We'll make sure they know that the town is contributing to the cost of the service. But, it's probably better if they see a lower number initially to try to get them to participate. And then we'll be billed monthly by TFC for the cost of the subsidy. And so they'll just be billed.
So they're gonna pay directly?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They pay
The
directly to
homeowner pays
Tidewater.
directly, right, Andy?
The homeowner sets up an account and they get a bill, and the bill will be for $9 a month, and then TFC will send us a separate bill for the remaining amount.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? I did get a second on that. Yes, we got a second. Thank you. Hearing none, then, all of those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Thank you.
Mayor, do you want us to go forward with the two contractual items that I mentioned?
Yes. Do we need to do that as a motion?
Well,
Mr. Yes, we do.
I think
Yes. So we need a motion to terminate the current contract with Bay Disposal, and to direct the manager to enter into a contract with TFC.
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Just one comment, Mr. Mayor. I assume by the board's action to terminate the contract, I think it's to terminate in compliance with the terms of the contract.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, hearing none, all of those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Thank you, Andy, and please express our thanks to the committee. In fact, I'll ask the clerk if you would prepare a letter to the members of the committee, from the board, so I can sign and send to them. I think that would be appropriate. They did a difficult thing, and they did good work, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda are any referrals or presentations from the town attorney.
Mr. Mayor, I only have one thing. I know that the agenda lists a closed session later on. I would like to ask that when the board enters closed session, that you also go in for the purpose of conferring with the town attorney regarding the 205 Baltic LLC litigation.
Okay, thank you. The next item on our agenda would be items from the town manager. Mr. Sparks?
Nothing, Mayor.
Okay, all right, thank you. Then that brings us to the Board of Commissioners agenda, and the mayor's agenda. I'll ask the board members if they have anything that's not listed on the agenda. Any board members who wish to bring any reports or business to the board?
I'll wait till it comes my turn, because I already got something on the agenda. I'll do this later.
Okay, thank you. In that case, then,
Appropriate now. We have had something for me.
yes. So, hearing none that's not listed other than Commissioner Coons, which she'll address in just a moment, Commissioner Fuller?
My request is for a closed session, and I'm assuming we could combine that with the attorney's request.
Yes, I believe we can combine all of these with the attorney's request.
I think that would be fine.
Okay.
Do we want to discuss Renee's email?
I'm offering that up.
All right, so thank you, Commissioner Fuller. Commissioner Coons?
Thank you, Mayor. I had a couple things. One was consideration of proposed amendments to the COVID-19 policy. Two changes I'd like to throw out to the board. One is for all those people that get the shot, give them an extra 4 hours of vacation for calendar year 2021, and also that it makes a note that the COVID-19 policy applies to those receiving shots when available. That's an amendment to the current language. That the COVID policy applies to those people that receive those shots.
So the effect of what you're saying is, if you get a COVID shot, you get an extra time off, and if you don't get a COVID shot, you're not eligible for the COVID relief that we've already established.
Right.
Okay.
That's correct. And the reason being that, it's an encouragement process, and everybody has to make the right to make their own personal decisions, but I'm not going to judge that one way or another. But usually a lot of times you have to get those shots, not necessarily on weekends, but during the week, and I'd like to offer an extra 4 hours of vacation. There may be side effects as well without using your sick leave, and those who get the shot still have the ability to take advantage of the COVID-19 policy. Those that don't with your sick leave or vacation time.
I got it. So there's a carrot and a stick to get the COVID shot.
I'd like to bring up the point that we have one employee that is on pregnancy leave, and her doctor has advised her not to get the shot. So in that force, we're actually, if she did get COVID, we're not giving her that leave.
And then I would say that she's out and already under a doctor's advice, that would not be applicable. The COVID-19 policy, any changes would not be applicable to that current employee. Does that make sense? She would not be affected at all by any change authority under a doctor's advice.
So anybody that had a doctor's note that said they would recommend you not get the shot, then that particular person would not be involved in that situation.
That's fine. If the doctor believes that a medically induced reason, that's fine. Because there are people that can't get it because of asthma.
Or heart conditions.
Mr. Branson.
It incentivizes those that should get it. John's a big proponent that we don't force anybody to do it. It needs to be their own decision. But we're not, I'm good with it.
Okay, great. Would that be in the form of a motion?
That is the-
I'm sorry, before you, make your motion, I have a question for clarification. With this, the first aspect, the, 4 hours of leave, would that be for those who get both the initial and the second vaccination?
Yeah.
Or would it be for just getting one shot? So
Typically, one
completing the two
doesn't do
vaccination
any good without the other. It would be for the program as recommended of 2 shots. Unless, Johnson & Johnson comes out with their 1-shot alternative.
So it could be for completing a vaccination protocol.
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you for asking the question. So that would be my motion, Mayor. 4 hours of vacation for calendar year 2021 fiscal year. That
For
way,
those who complete the protocol.
to complete the protocol and the amendment that the COVID-19 policy that we have currently adopted applies to those that get the regimen of the shot, or unless they have a doctor's advice presented to the HR director at the, why they would not.
What about the COVID protocol that's already been used?
We're going from today forward, you can't go back.
See?
Okay. All right. Have that motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Further discussion? Mr. Attorney, any further thoughts about this?
No, sir.
Okay. But no, I mean, I appreciate Eric's approach. I think I agree, that's a perfect way to handle this, to encourage as many folks as possible. With the understanding that those who can't for medical reasons.
One other clarification, what happens if they get COVID prior to being available shot?
That's kind of a loose one.
Like, it is, but it isn't. Because you're saying that if they don't get the shot, they're not eligible for COVID. And I'm saying, what happens if,
That would depend on whether they,
what happens if Carolyn walks out the door today and gets COVID? She's not eligible because she hadn't had an eligibility for the
depends on
shot.
whether you're eligible for the shot. Some people have already been eligible, some people have not. I mean, maybe if you're not eligible yet to get the shot, then you're still under the COVID policy.
I just want that clear. I mean, because it was one or the other. I just want it clear. There's some loose ends.
As long as they have the opportunity to.
If they turn down the opportunity to get the shot, then that's when they.
Then that's when they lose.
Correct.
That's a little different than how we were describing it, so.
I would also, on that point, which is a very good point, I would add that the town previously took action, I think it was in January, to extend the emergency paid sick leave that is available through the CARES Act, which is no longer required of employers, but employers have the right to extend it through March 31st. So the town's done that, which means there's a benefit of 80 hours of paid sick leave available through that program for any employee who misses work because they've become infected or they're not ordered to quarantine or isolate, and that'll last through March 31st. So it's sort of another way of providing some protection or benefit for employees who aren't able to get vaccinated before they might get the virus.
And we're probably gonna come back and extend that at some point because the obvious fact is not everybody's gonna be vaccinated by March 31st. We all know that's probably gonna be extended based on just the number of vaccines available.
Okay. Further questions, clarification? Hearing none, if you're ready to vote, then all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Anything else? Mr.
Yes, Mayor, I have one more item. As we've gone through the discussion of hotels and so forth, and I'd like to thank Commissioner Fuller for asking more questions than I or others have perhaps have thought of. It has come out that the reason that we're having some of the hotel discussions is that when we adopted the UDOs, we talked about unintended consequences. There were some. Hotels became non-conforming instead of allowed uses. Churches became non-conforming as being allowed in shopping centers. I don't think anybody, well, I'll fix myself. I did not realize that when we adopted the UDO, we started saying hotels non-conforming instead of allowed uses, or churches and strip malls as not allowed for conforming uses. So I'd like to suggest that as we go through this process, we all talked about we would have to clean up the UDO. This is a prime time to clean up the UDO for these two uses. That instead of going through this long process, and this may help us out in the hotel thing as we go forward, that we put on the next meeting consent agenda, reverting hotels back to an allowed use with the same standards that they have in our zoning ordinance, and churches that were allowed uses in the strip malls as they were allowed before we adopted the UDO. I don't think everything that was bad in our zoning ordinance we dealt with, and we had unintended consequences on the good things that were in our zoning ordinance. We've always said that we wanted to keep the hotels we have and try to help them survive. Making them a non-conforming use did not do that. It's made it much more of an impediment, and we're wrestling with standards and this and that and the other about how to deal with it. Let's take it back, and let's, instead of dragging out the process, let's put it under consent agenda and bring back the same language that we had in our zoning ordinance for hotels and churches as we go under that consent agenda. That was what I had.
Thank you.
If it made sense. If not, I'll try to clarify myself.
It makes sense today.
Commissioner Fuller,
I agree.
Mr. Hughes. I have some concern about it being on the consent agenda as opposed to just on the agenda.
I don't mind it being on the agenda as long as it's strictly ready to be voted on and not called out for change here and change there. As long as it's on the next agenda, I'm fine.
Michael. So, the March 3rd hearing, or March 3rd meeting, there is an agenda item related to the non-conforming hotels and related to hotels. We did have planning board yesterday where we talked about that, where you had referred it back to the planning board. And knowing that there had been communication regarding the possibility that hotels would be considered to be made allowed in CR, we discussed that with the planning board yesterday. So in my opinion, and we can confirm that with the town attorney, I would say that the text amendment that is before you, that it is within the scope of that discussion with the planning board at least, and within the scope of the text amendment that's been moving forward, that the board should consider making hotels and allow permitted use back in CR, presumably subject to a conditional use permit. Now, the planning board had some discussion about it, which may or may not be relevant to the board, but I think it's important to clarify whether or not the board's intended to make hotels an allowed permitted use in CR, or if the intent is to not permit new hotels. If the board's interested in permitting new hotels, then you make it allowed use in the CR. If the focus of the board is on ensuring that the existing hotels can continue and evolve, then my opinion would be that we're on that track already. With respect to churches or religious facilities, the process, and I think the attorney would advise you of the same, on the March 3rd meeting, or today actually, you could schedule a public hearing, I believe as soon as you could do it, of your regular meetings would be April. You could do that today, refer it to the planning board, it would go to the planning board for their March meeting. You could not act on a text amendment until it's been referred to the planning board, and I believe they've not submitted a recommendation to you within 30 days. So that would be a requirement under state statute and the UDO.
So cleaning up the UDO is not as easy as if we were led to believe when we adopted the UDO.
Well, we've already gone through 2 phases of cleaning up the UDO, but I think, and I respect where you're coming from, but on hotels, it was presented that it was removed from CR. Because I've reviewed the record on it. And on religious facilities, other uses perhaps that were formerly allowed in a mixed-use scenario, like a shopping center, there was at least a conscious effort to limit the uses that are allowed in a mixed-use scenario, such as a shopping center. If the board now wants to broaden it, I think that's fine through the text amendment process. But that's the only process that you have to amend your zoning regulation. Well, I don't want to step outside state statute, either. And so, let's take the easier one first. So, I would suggest that we have a motion, that we refer to the planning board at the next available opportunity and bring back to this board at the earliest practical opportunity an amendment to allow religious facilities in mixed-use conditions, including shopping centers.
What was the ordinance before?
So prior to the UDO, it's my understanding that, mixed-use scenarios, and it really was shopping centers and group, commercial group developments, that any permitted use within the underlying zoning district would have been allowed in a shopping center. And I think the issue was, for the technical committee, was that too broad, because there were some uses that perhaps were allowed in the underlying zoning district would not necessarily be appropriate in a shopping center. So that's why, through the UDO, the list of allowable uses was narrowed down.
Mayor, weren't you on that technical committee?
Yes.
Do you recall that ever being brought up?
I recall some discussion about churches and appropriateness in shopping centers. I can't remember the detail of that conversation. But I don't think it was specifically focused on the uses that, like churches necessarily. I think it was more focused on the uses that would be appropriate, at least in that frame of, in that discussion. What would be the uses that we can envision being appropriate in a mixed-use scenario? I don't think it was specifically intended to exclude churches. It was more focused on, okay, what are the uses we definitely want to include?
But it's not about the use of the church or the churches being included. You basically had an ordinance that said you're in this zoning and this is allowed, but then you took that and you said, all right, but in this specific situation, that's not allowed.
That's
And that's
correct.
how the UDO was put into place.
Well, the UDO, so a shopping center is a specific use type.
Which was allowed in that zoning.
Correct.
But then you eliminated what the shopping center could put inside the shopping center because of this mixed-use term in the new UDO.
In some cases, that's correct. Right.
Which goes back to the beginning of my comment back when the UDO, we can do things, but we can't do certain things inside of certain things. And that's the same reason we can't have townhouses, we can't have multifamily homes, we can't have other things because of the contradiction between the ordinances.
That's a long discussion.
No, it is, but it comes back to this. We were unaware that by removing the hotels out of this one district into another district, or saying you can't have them, caused all this problem. Now you change something that was allowed to happen inside of a certain zoning ordinance because it's in a shopping center. Now, we may or may not want that in the shopping center, but now, since we can't, we've changed 50 years of what was allowed. Now that's non-conforming. So we went and created more non-conformity when 3.5 years ago, when we joined this board, it was the mission to try not to create any more non-conformity and bring things back to conformity. So the UDO pushed more things to a non-conforming status in this. But for us to change some of those, we have to go through a whole nother process of months of technicalities, for lack of a better term.
So the churches though that we do have, like for example, Coastal Family Church, that was conforming UGA came along, which made it non-conforming, do those people, do they know that they're a non-conforming use?
I would expect they would have as much awareness as anyone else that.
The answer is no.
So, yeah,
Unless you want something, you don't know you're non-conforming.
because I can tell you, I attended that church and I find that when I learned that it was non-conforming, I guess is that Pastor Steve Hurtep, and neither one knows that that's the case. But they will now.
Can I make a motion that at the earliest possible date, we schedule a public hearing? Whether it's our mid-month meeting in March, which is 30 days. That's also after a planning board meeting.
I think it's only 28 days.
Okay, first meeting in March at 9 a.m. Excuse me, first meeting in April at 9 a.m. That's item one. That's my motion.
That's for
The church,
the church.
or the religious facility.
Yes. There's a second.
Second.
Did we include anything that was removed from that zoning area in shopping center? Or can we have at least have a list of discussion of what else was removed in that particular zoning that's not now allowed in the shopping center? Or do we know what is not else, what other things aren't allowed yet?
I mean, we can certainly give you a comparison from the previous ordinance to current. It's, you know, we have new use types defined, so it may not be an apples to apples, but we can show you that, sure.
I recall probably going on 5 years ago, staff spent several months identifying what was allowed per zone and what wasn't allowed for each zone. And it sounds like to me that got switched a little bit during this new UDO process.
Well, again, I think there was, whether there was general awareness or not, there was conscious decision-making and conscious discussions that set in respectful developers over the years. And the composition of this board has changed since then too. I think it's perfectly fine if this board wants to amend the ordinance. But I think that's absolutely perfectly fine to do that. I don't know that.
I think the point is, the mayor was on the technical committee, the mayor and another board member at the time spent 3 years helping develop this, and he was unaware of the changes that were made in that particular instance.
I don't think I heard him say that.
So you knew the churches weren't going to be allowed in that city anymore.
I don't deny that that decision was made.
Yes.
And I was saying,
I'm not saying you weren't there, I'm just saying that, you know, when we talked about it before, you were unaware of it. So that was kind of where I'm going with that. It was something that you mentioned it, but you didn't know that it was removed.
but, you know, we're gonna continue to find things that we don't like about the UDO. And that's clearly, that's gonna be the case. It doesn't change the fact that there were, in fact, years of meetings, and there was a lot of deliberation. Some of it lost to history at this point. And all of those decisions were embodied in the UDO, and we all had the UDO in our hands. So if we don't like things, let's change them. But, you know, we can't undo the process that we spent a lot of time.
Can I second that? The only people that are complicit in the adoption of the UDO are 4 people sitting here, plus one other. Commissioner Brinkley wasn't here. The board had ample time to gather all the information staff presented to us, and I feel like I've let myself down on certain things. I have talked, however, with people that were on the policy committee, and from at least their recollection as it relates to churches, they don't remember any discussion about eliminating churches. There's some discussion that was remembered about large structures on the beach, but specifically designated toward hotels, they do not remember that. So here again, I apologize for me not doing my due diligence. I have nothing, to say to staff positive or negative. They just did what we asked them to do. And I say we, it was a previous board, but it's still us. We were the ones that adopted it. And I'm just sorry we're in this position, but I agree with you, Mayor. I mean, from the standpoint of, you know, if we got a mistake, let's just fix it.
Right. So our current motion is to fix one of them, which is to add religious facilities back to mixed use. I believe I had a second for that. That would be at the earliest available meeting, which appears to be the April meeting. Any further discussion on that item? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Now to the hotel, putting hotels back as permitted use. The reason I didn't like it on the consent agenda was because we didn't have hotels built, new hotels built on the ocean front for a long period of time when they were permitted in the CR. My sense is that that's mostly not because of what air rules were, but because between air rules, the camera setbacks, the FEMA regulations, and the size of the properties that are available, we just happened not to get any hotels built, even though they were permitted uses. If we simply go and put those back in, are we saying we're willing to continue to rely on all of those same circumstances to prevent a hotel from being built on the ocean front?
My motion included the fact that if there would be the same standards with the height, setback, those kind of things. It was not to change the height, it was not to do away with lot lines or setbacks. It was to keep the same standards that we had before, which was a impediment to new hotels, granted, because of the height limit.
So it will be restoring the use and a set of conditions that essentially will preclude a new hotel from being built. But restore use
It's not
for
going to
those
get things done in
non-conforming.
non-conforming. And it's going to take us forever, I think, to do anything under the current process. We wouldn't be having anything done that would help any hotel for this summer.
Let me ask the attorney, John, so we have a public hearing scheduled for next week to consider what to do with non-conforming hotels.
Right.
Conditionally. How much latitude do we have in that public hearing? Can we just say essentially what we're saying here is that we change that whole text to permitting hotels as a use under the prior standards?
That, I'm concerned that would be, and I think Mr. Sanders' concern is that would be a substantive change to what's coming before the board and what the planning board has already reviewed. And it's a substantive change to the ordinance, to the ordinance that's being considered, that requires a new consideration by the planning board and a separate public hearing. So I think that's the concern.
So,
Intentionally, the board did have a conversation about it yesterday, within the scope of the consideration of the test.
I mean, we can have the public hearing, we don't have to act.
well, that was my, so if we want to do a text amendment, as we're going to do then with hotels as a use, we would be on the same timeline as the one we just discussed for churches, meaning the earliest that we could do that would be the April meeting. And I would suggest that we simply continue the public hearing until at least that time, because
You mean the one that we had in March?
yeah.
On the
The one that,
issue?
yeah.
do it all at one time.
It could become moot. I mean, if we change, if we get to the April meeting and in one action, restore hotel as a use with some criteria, then the whole discussion of the public hearing we propose to have becomes moot.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Makes sense to just really have one public hearing.
Correct.
And it can consider multiple different revisions to the ordinance, as long as it's properly noticed and scheduled and reviewed by the planning.
Okay.
So are you suggesting that you would initiate a separate item to allow for hotels in the CR district?
I think we would have to. If that's what we want.
With an appropriate set of regulatory tools,
Such as what we have.
such as what we've had in the past, which is basically height, setbacks,
Lot coverage.
lot coverage. I don't think there was any disregard for accessory parts of a hotel, like a restaurant or swimming pools or anything. You know, I think they were all part of allowed parts of hotels.
Well, and what we would be asking staff to do, and then the planning board to do, would be basically put hotels in the CR district and review the rest of the ordinance for conformity to make sure that, you know, the supplemental design standard, all the stuff that would be consistent to restore it to the original, you know, the rules that existed prior to this, unit.
Which does include design standards, so I think that's very important.
Okay. So if that's the direction the board wishes to give staff, that a motion will be in order.
So moved.
For a second?
Second.
To clarify, are you scheduling the public hearing for the April meeting night?
Yes. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you, that's all.
Kevin, do you have anything?
No, sir, thank you.
Whether you don't have anything else?
The only thing I said, the only thing from the Tourist Bureau is something I sent out in the memo to everybody. So you already have all the information.
Commissioner Stevens?
Nothing.
Thank you. And then that brings us to the mayor's agenda. The only thing I have is a closed session for minutes. We have, a motion would be in order for the board to go into closed session for the purposes requested by Commissioner Fuller to protect the attorney-client privilege, for the purposes requested by the mayor for considering a closed session minutes, and for the question of the attorney to update the board on.
Regarding the litigation with 205 Baltic LLC.
Yeah.
So,
Ask a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
Have a motion and a second for the board to go into closed session for those indicated purposes. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you for being closed session. The board has returned to open session. Mr. Whiting, will you please report?
Yes, sir. The board did confer with the town attorney regarding the Baltic, 205 Baltic LLC litigation and other matters within the attorney-client privilege council. The board also took action to approve closed session minutes for 2020 and to approve of the sealing or opening of those in accordance with the schedule prepared by the town clerk.
All right, thank you. That brings us to item L, any other business remaining before adjournment? Anything else to come before the board? Seeing none, then a motion to adjourn would be in order.
so moved. Second.
Motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you.